get them a benchmark in terms of digital ratio between print revenues and digital revenues. The concern that we have, and see what you think about this, is when you start looking at declines on the top line, going into digital, you're trading dollars for pennies in a sense, and exaggerating, but effectively you have intermediaries, lower CPMs. It's just a different and more competition. So those declines, the increase in digital is not really counterbalancing what you see in terms of decline on the top line. At least not yet. And that impacts the free cash flows because newspaper in general are a high fixed cost business, so the ability to really sort of keep the overhead and the infrastructure, print and distribution, all that machine going is still a burden. So, and then there is exposure in this phase of the economy. We've been talking about recession for 5 years. Understand that, so it's not happened yet, but it will at some point. So there is sensitivity in terms of how advertising track with GDP in case that slows down. So the question is really how sustainable the free cash flows are, since they're really operating at $100 million in free cash flow and at $3 billion. So it's pretty thin. And the top line is not growing unless you acquire more papers or more assets, local assets. So I'd like to get a perspective from you if you think there is a light at the end of the tunnel, or if this sensitivity that we're picking up is real and dangerous. Some newspaper went way up, so we're looking at this with open eyes. So like to get your perspective on the business overall. Gannett specifically, are they any different than the other big papers? How are they positioned in their portfolio? Anything that you can contribute on that standpoint?
So a few things. So first off, I think everything that you said is spot on. The way that they've actually been able to be effective has been a result of that top line growth through acquisition, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because, quite frankly, as I mentioned, if Gannett can find properties at low enough price point and integrate it into that already existing fixed cost infrastructure, there are smart ways that you can actually turn it around and be able to recoup your investment in as short as 6 months, as I mentioned. So I think that will continue to be an opportunity, but that, as you said, the structural side of that newspaper consumption is actually going to continue. It's only going to further accelerate as more and more users consume more of their content. So even if it's the same content from Gannett or New York Times and so forth, they're increasingly consuming it on places like Facebook and Apple News and Google AMP pages and so forth. Google's a little different because you can still monetize. But even within digital, there's pressure where they're only getting a portion or having restrictions on the ad units that they can sell within the digital side, as increasing numbers of their users, especially younger generations, are spending more of their time off property at these destination sites. So I don't think that decline is changing anytime soon. I do think that Gannett, compared to the other properties, is a little bit better off. I think I'd rather, in general, you need to be either at the high-end premium side or you need to be in local. You need to be either, you mentioned a few of the properties.
New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all those brand properties that have a really reputable, credible voice and brand. That's the premium side, as you're describing it.
Yeah. So you've got that, and particular, and the reality is, with the elections, with Trump in office, that's actually helped save the newspaper industry, because there's increasing pressure around not having fake news, having credible media, and just his battles with media and newspapers has increased exposure and credibility. And so the level of engagement has risen, and even Facebook, in order to fight fake news, has given more authority to like the higher end premium content players. So that's one trend that I would say is helping sustain, in that there's a shift back to quality, there's a shift back to willingness to pay, and hence you have, the increases in subscription revenues for the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and so forth. But that's only a few key players. And so I think Gannett has the challenge of, USA Today is premium enough that it's a trusted source, and so it'll do well within the open Facebook and other ecosystem environments, and it'll get top ranking. But it's not premium enough that people are going to buy a subscription to it in the same way that you would with a Wall Street Journal. So just as long as you're, in terms of the economic forecast that you're counting on, it's just as long as you're not counting on that, that's a core component. The other strategy that is a little bit questionable is the local and national tie-in. So how they've had a big push around how much they can take their local properties and integrate content into USA Today, and somewhat vice versa, but mainly, how to leverage the local content into USA Today. I don't know that's necessarily a winning strategy, because it takes a hard execution to do so, because as you can imagine, the local properties care a lot about how their journalistic integrity, how they position themselves, and have strong opinions and views on how they're presented. USA Today is about being catchy and like eye-drawing type of content, which is very different from the typical way that a local newspaper or a local property wants to cover themselves. So I'm not sure that I really buy that local national tie-in across the two, which I think is a little bit of a challenge for Gannett specifically. That said, I do think their actual local properties and their approach with Reach Local is spot on the right way they should do it. Not that it's going to be easy, but that is absolutely the right strategy and approach, and that they are much more, if they are investing heavily and they basically say, no, we need to win in each of these local markets. It's what AOL tried to do with Patch, but what a local newspaper can actually do. They need to be the destination and resource for where any local community, neighborhood, property resource, you're going to that online destination, and they've got to rebrand from being just a newspaper than your community destination. And if they can do more of that and provide, monetized services and so forth, that's where they have the opportunity to succeed, because that's where they have the differentiated edge. They often have local entities and local celebrities, like basically writers and so forth, that people track and follow. That's where they can actually have a little level engagement. The second side, as I mentioned, with the local is they can do live events, right? So the other side of where digital can't compete, and where like the Facebooks of the world that actually don't compete, is they can host a local event at the high school in the neighborhood, sponsored by the newspaper community. That's something that they can actually charge for. They can get sponsors. They can drive new revenues from. They've gotten some level of that, but that's where they actually have a competitive edge versus others. And if you look at more broadly speaking, the live events sector space is one that is growing, and there's willingness to spend, and it further reinforces that relationship with a local audience.
And in terms of this execution, picking up on your last comment, how do we test for where they are down that path and their ability to execute going forward? I would presume that in a positive economy, since what we experienced in the past 5-6 years, strong growth in ad budgets, we should have seen powerful execution on their part at the local level, which we picking up